Hey Midnights! Thank you for listening to Midnight Overdose. Subscribe to our channel. Our next story, Urban Nightmare, Dr. Fights Terrifying Aswang and Metro Manila Blackout. The humid air hung heavy over Metro Manila, thick with the scent of vehicle exhaust, rain-soaked concrete, and the distant hum of 1,000 air conditioners. For Elias, a young doctor recently returned from a medical mission in the rural provinces, it was a familiar chaos. He'd come home to care for his ailing grandmother, whose fading health seemed to mirror the city's own ceaseless, often suffocating, rhythm. But Manila, with its glittering skyscrapers and sprawling informal settlements, harbored a chilling secret, one whispered in hushed tones in the inner-city barangays and secluded suburban compounds, a fear personified by the Aswang. Elias had always dismissed the tales as provincial folklore, remnants of a bygone era, incongruous with the hyper-modern pulse of the capital. Yet, as the nights grew longer and the moon waxed full, an unsettling tension permeated the city. Rumors circulated of missing construction workers in newly developed subdivisions, of strange occurrences in dimly lit alleys of older districts, and a pervasive, sweet sickly odor, like rotting flowers mingling with sewage, occasionally drifted on the breeze, even reaching his grandmother's old house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Quezon City. One evening, while checking on his grandmother, Elias heard it, a peculiar, almost liquid tick-tick-tick sound, rhythmic and faint, seemingly coming from the roof. His grandmother, frail and barely conscious, suddenly gripped his hand with surprising strength. Her eyes, clouded with age, widened in terror. "The Aswang," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "It's near." Elias scoffed internally, trying to reassure her. This particular Aswang, a gruesome form, was said to be a beautiful woman by day who, under the cover of night, would sever her upper torso from her lower body, growing bat-like wings to soar through the darkness. It was a creature of myth, surely, not something that could exist amidst the urban sprawl. But the sound persisted, growing louder, closer. Driven by a morbid curiosity he couldn't explain, Elias crept to the window. The moon, a sliver of silver, cast long, distorted shadows across the neighboring rooftops and the distant glow of city lights. Then he saw it. It wasn't a woman, not entirely. It was a grotesque, fragmented horror. The upper half, indeed, resembled a gaunt, almost skeletal female torso, with long, matted black hair that seemed to writhe on its own. Its skin was the color of bruised plums, taut over protruding bones. But the most terrifying feature were the eyes, wide, luminous orbs that glowed with an unsettling crimson light, reflecting the sliver of moonlight. From its shoulders sprouted enormous, leathery wings, like those of a monstrous fruit bat, beating with a wet, sinuous grace that produced the chilling tick-tick-tick sound. Dangling beneath it, a mass of glistening internal organs, intestines, a heart, a liver, pulsed and squirmed, dripping black fluid onto the tin roof below. It was this lower half, severed and left behind, that was the Aswang's vulnerability, its Achilles heel. The creature hovered, its gaze fixed on his grandmother's window. Elias felt a cold dread seize him. The Aswang wasn't after gold or revenge. It was after something far more primal, far more chilling. They were after the unborn, the sick, and the weak. This form of Aswang in particular craved the fetal heart, using its impossibly long, thin proboscis-like tongue to pierce through ceilings and walls, even the cracked plaster of an old suburban home, siphoning the life from the unborn. But any vulnerable life, especially those nearing death, was fair game for the different forms of Aswang. They were drawn to the scent of illness and vulnerability, a macabre predator feasting on the edges of life, even in the heart of the metropolis. The horrifying truth dawned on Elias. His grandmother, frail and fading, was a prime target. Her life force, weak and diminished, was a beacon to such a creature. She was close to the veil between worlds, and the Aswang was drawn to that threshold, seeking to pluck the dwindling life from her before it could slip away naturally. The creature extended its impossibly long, black tongue, a horrifying needle-like appendage, and it began to slowly, methodically, descend towards the window. Elias knew then that the legends were not just stories. They were warnings. And he was standing between his beloved grandmother and a nightmare made flesh, here, in the supposed safety of his suburban home. Elias's terrified reaction was immediate and visceral. His breath hitched, a strangled gasp caught in his throat. His blood ran cold, a wave of sickening nausea washing over him. The sight of that grotesque, fragmented body, the pulsing organs, the chillingly intelligent crimson eyes, it defied every scientific principle he held dear, every logical explanation. His mind screamed in denial, but his body was paralyzed by an overwhelming, primal fear. He felt a dizzying surge of adrenaline, his limbs trembling uncontrollably, not just from the cold dread but from the sheer, mind-numbing horror of witnessing something utterly impossible and unequivocally evil. He could only stare, wide-eyed, a silent scream building in his chest, as the monster prepared to strike. The long, black tongue of the Aswang pulsed, inching closer to the window. Elias's medical training, all his years of scientific reasoning, shattered in that instant. This was no fever dream, no hallucination. This was real. A primal instinct, sharper than any he'd known, surged through him. He remembered the old wives' tales, the superstitions he dismissed as folklore. Garlic, salt, a stingray's tail, these were the things said to repel an Aswang. He had none of these readily available in his modern kitchen. But then, a flash of something else, something simpler. The Aswang's vulnerability. Its severed lower half. He bolted from the room, his grandmother's faint whimpers echoing behind him. Downstairs, in the kitchen, his eyes darted frantically. What could he use? His gaze landed on a large, rusty bolo knife, usually reserved for yard work, leaning against the counter near the back door. It wasn't a stingray's tail, but it was sharp. Clutching the bolo, Elias raced back to the window. The Aswang was closer now, its crimson eyes fixed on the room. He could hear the faint, sickening sound of its proboscis scraping against the glass. He knew he had to be quick. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Elias threw open the window. The humid night air rushed in, carrying the putrid scent of decay. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, guttural sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the night, startling dogs in neighboring yards and causing a flicker in the streetlights. Its enormous wings beat furiously, creating a whirlwind that whipped Elias's hair into his eyes. He didn't hesitate. With a desperate cry, Elias lunged, swinging the bolo knife in a wide arc towards the pulsating mass of organs dangling beneath the Aswang's upper torso. The blade connected with a sickening thud, a sound Elias would forever associate with visceral horror. Black, viscous fluid splattered across his face and the clean tiles of the window ledge, burning like acid. He staggered back, a primal scream caught in his throat, fighting the urge to vomit. The Aswang let out another ear-splitting shriek, a sound of agony and rage that felt like a physical blow. It writhed, its wings thrashing wildly, sending shards of roof tile skittering across the lawn. Then, with a grotesque shudder, it began to pull away. Elias saw a shimmering, ethereal cord, barely visible, snapping and retracting. The creature, wounded and screaming, ascended rapidly into the darkness, its silhouette disappearing against the hazy glow of the city skyline, leaving a trail of the foul-smelling fluid behind it. Elias slumped against the wall, the bolo knife still clutched in his trembling hand. His heart hammered against his ribs, his breath ragged. He was covered in the Aswang's ichor, but he was alive. His grandmother was safe, at least for now. But the image of those crimson eyes, the dangling organs, and the agonizing shriek were burned into his mind. He knew then that his time in Metro Manila was no longer just about caring for his grandmother. It was about understanding the terrifying reality that lurked in the shadows of his hometown. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that the Aswang would be back. The sheer audacity of it, striking in a place he considered safe, filled him with a cold dread unlike anything he'd ever felt in a sterile operating room. The attack left Elias shaken, but resolute. He knew the Aswang wouldn't just give up. His grandmother, though still weak, seemed to draw a fragile strength from his presence, her hand finding his in a silent plea. The flickering LED night light cast long, dancing shadows, turning familiar objects into monstrous shapes. He could still smell the cloying, putrid scent of the Aswang's ichor clinging to his skin, a grim reminder of their encounter. He scrubbed furiously in the bathroom, but the smell seemed to have seeped into his very pores. He spent the rest of the night in a feverish study, poring over his grandmother's old, brittle books on Filipino folklore, texts he'd once scoffed at as superstitious relics, now suddenly terrifyingly relevant. He learned more about the varied forms of Aswang, the tikbalang said to haunt abandoned highways on the outskirts of the city, the tranak that mimicked a crying baby in urban alleys or construction sites, the shape-shifting wak-wak that could turn into a large bird, preying on unsuspecting night shift workers or security guards in industrial parks. But his immediate concern remained this specific form of Aswang. The books confirmed what he'd instinctively known, the severed lower half was the Aswang's ultimate vulnerability. If it couldn't reattach before dawn, the creature would perish in the rising sun. They were also repelled by salt, garlic, and the tail of a stingray, objects of common superstition that now held chilling significance, even in a metropolitan setting. He realized with a jolt that his grandmother had likely known about these defenses for years, a silent guardian in their seemingly normal home. As the first sliver of dawn painted the sky in pale grays and purples over the sprawling urban landscape, Elias began his grim task. He secured his grandmother's room, scattering generous amounts of rock salt he found in the pantry around the windows and doorframe, crushing cloves of garlic and smearing the pungent paste on the sill. He even found a small, dried stingray tail, a forgotten amulet from a family trip to Palawan years ago, tucked away in an old chest, and hung it above her bed, its rough texture a strange comfort. But these were defensive measures. To truly defeat the Aswang, he needed to find its abandoned lower half. He remembered the faint dripping sound he'd heard on the roof. The creature must have left its vulnerable part somewhere nearby, perhaps hidden in the dense foliage of a neighbor's overgrown garden, or the abandoned shed next to his house, or even a drainage ditch. The thought of it lying there, so close, sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. With the bolo knife still clutched tightly, Elias ventured out into the pre-dawn gloom. The air was cool, but a different kind of chill ran down his spine. Every rustle of leaves from the manicured bushes, every shadow cast by the streetlights, seemed to hold a lurking menace. The sweet sickly odor of the Aswang was fainter now, but it was still there, a ghostly scent guiding him. He scoured the immediate vicinity, his eyes scanning for any disturbance, any clue. He found it near the old, unused dog kennel in the backyard, half hidden beneath a tangle of bougainvillea vines. It was the lower torso of a human, pale and lifeless, yet unnervingly intact. The flesh was strangely cold, even in the humid morning, and a faint, almost imperceptible pulsation could be seen within its exposed abdominal cavity. It lay like a discarded doll, utterly still, devoid of the monstrous life that had propelled its upper half through the night, yet so unnervingly present. The thought of it lying there, so vulnerable yet so terrifyingly connected to the monster that had tried to steal his grandmother's life, sent shivers down his spine. Elias raised the bolo. This was it. The final blow. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the sheer unnaturalness of what he was about to do weighing heavily on him. He was a doctor, sworn to preserve life, not destroy it, especially in such a monstrous way. But then, he thought of his grandmother, her frail hand clutching his, her terror, and the horrifying image of the Aswang's tongue reaching for her. His hesitation vanished. With a grim determination, he brought the bolo down, not once, but repeatedly, hacking at the inert flesh, a frenzy born of fear and adrenaline, trying to destroy it beyond any hope of reattachment. Each swing was met with a sickening wet thud, and more of the black, foul-smelling fluid welled up, coating the grass around it. He then gathered handfuls of coarse salt from the sack he'd brought, pouring it over the mangled remains, watching as tiny sizzles erupted from the contact, almost as if the flesh was alive, screaming silently. He even found an old, rusty can of paint thinner in the shed and, with a shaky hand, doused the destroyed lower half. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues over the urban sprawl, Elias struck a match. A small, acrid flame blossomed, then quickly engulfed the remains. The air filled with the stench of burning flesh and something else, something cloying and foul, like burning putrescence, a smell that even the city's usual pollution couldn't quite mask. He watched, utterly transfixed, as the grotesque mass shriveled, blackened, and slowly turned to ash, a grim exorcism. He watched until nothing remained but ash and the lingering, awful smell. Elias knew he had done what was necessary. The fear that had gripped his suburban home, at least from this Aswang, was gone. But as he walked back to the house, exhausted but strangely victorious, a new, unsettling understanding settled over him. The world was not as simple as he had once believed, even in the bustling heart of Manila. And in the quiet corners of the Philippines, both urban and rural, there were horrors that science couldn't explain, only fight. The victory was hollow, a temporary reprieve. Elias slumped into a chair beside his grandmother's bed, the adrenaline fading, leaving him utterly drained. He was no longer just a doctor, he was a reluctant guardian, a soldier in a war he hadn't known existed. The realization was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He couldn't go back to his old life, not now. The Aswang was real, and it had targeted his family. "Nana," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "I saw it. I stopped it." His grandmother's eyes fluttered open, recognition slowly replacing the terror. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "You always were brave, Elias," she rasped, her voice stronger than before. "But this is not over. They will know. They will know." The words echoed in Elias's mind. The Aswang, particularly this form, were said to be highly territorial, fiercely protective of their hunting grounds. His act of defiance, of striking back, would not go unnoticed. He had marked himself. Over the next few days, Elias transformed his home. The old books on folklore became his new medical texts. He researched extensively, not just from the dusty tomes but from whispered rumors among the oldest residents of their barangay who still visited his grandmother. He bought sacks of rock salt, strung garlands of garlic around every window and door, and even began to grow his own makabui plants, their bitter leaves said to repel evil. He learned that the aswang would often try to trick you, appearing as a trusted friend, a helpful neighbor, or even a lost child. He began to eye everyone with a new, unsettling suspicion, his gaze lingering on the shadows beneath their eyes, the subtle shift in their demeanor. One afternoon, a week after the attack, a young woman, strikingly beautiful with long, flowing black hair, came to the door. She introduced herself as Maria, a distant cousin from a neighboring barangay, claiming she'd heard about his grandmother's illness and wanted to offer help. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She was too perfect, too eager. Her eyes, though seemingly warm, held a depth that sent a prickle of unease up his spine. He remembered the descriptions of this aswang by day, often beautiful, seemingly ordinary women. He offered her a glass of water, discreetly adding a pinch of salt to it. She drank it without a flicker of discomfort, but Elias watched her closely. When she leaned over to offer his grandmother a small, woven gift, Elias saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible tick-tick-tick sound seemed to emanate from beneath her long skirt, a sound that only he, now acutely attuned, could detect. His blood ran cold. The creature was bold, returning so soon, even attempting to blend in, to lull him into a false sense of security. It was a taunt, a test. "Thank you, Maria," Elias said, his voice strained but steady, fighting to keep the tremor from his hands. "But we are fine now. My grandmother is recovering." Maria's smile tightened, her eyes flashing with something Elias couldn't quite decipher, a hint of something ancient and malevolent, a flicker of crimson in their depths. "Are you sure, Elias? I could stay and help with the nights. They say the city is not as safe as it once was. Especially for those who are weak." Her gaze lingered on his grandmother, a possessive, hungry look that made Elias's skin crawl. The shocking moment hit Elias. This wasn't just a monster. It was a predator, cunning and insidious, capable of mimicry that would fool anyone unprepared. He forced himself to remain calm, his hand instinctively reaching for the bolo he now kept hidden beneath a cloth near the door. "Thank you for your concern, Maria, but we will manage. Please, don't trouble yourself." She finally left, her footsteps unnervingly silent on the paved driveway. Elias watched her go, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He knew then that his fight was far from over. It was a constant vigilance, a silent battle against a darkness that wore human skin. He was no longer just a doctor mending bodies, he was a sentinel, protecting what little light remained in a world suddenly revealed to be teeming with unseen horrors. The city, once a symbol of progress, now felt like a vast hunting ground, and Elias, unknowingly, had just declared war. He had chosen to fight, and the aswang had accepted his challenge. 2 nights later, the city was plunged into a sudden, unexpected blackout. The hum of air conditioners died, the street lights winked out, and a suffocating darkness descended, broken only by the distant glow of cell phone screens. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The perfect cover. He grabbed his bolo, now sharpened to a razor's edge, its steel gleaming faintly in the near-total darkness. He had prepared. His grandmother's room was secured, garlic and salt forming a formidable barrier. But he wouldn't hide. He would hunt. The familiar tick-tick-tick began, closer this time, accompanied by a new sound, a faint, guttural snuffling, like a hungry animal. It was no longer just one. He could hear other, fainter tick-tick-tick sounds, a chorus of malevolence echoing from different directions. The aswang had brought friends. He crept out of the back door, into the oppressive suburban night. The sweet sickly scent was overpowering, mingling with the metallic tang of something foul. He saw them. Not one flying aswang, but 3, circling above his house like monstrous, ethereal vultures. Their crimson eyes, now clearly visible against the dark sky, locked onto him. The one he'd wounded before, Maria, was among them, her upper torso a grotesque parody of her daytime beauty, her wings beating with a furious, vengeful energy. "Hello," guttural growl ripped from her, not human, but something ancient and bestial. She swooped first, her proboscis extended, aiming for his chest. Elias barely dodged, the air whistling past his ear as the wicked tongue plunged into the soft earth where he'd stood, leaving a smoking hole. He swung the bolo, aiming for her dangling organs, but she was faster, higher. Then, the true horror unfolded. One of the other flying aswang peeled off, descending not towards his house, but towards his neighbors, drawn by the faint cry of a newborn baby Elias knew lived there. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone. No! Elias screamed, a raw, desperate sound. He couldn't fight three, and he couldn't protect two houses at once. Maria, the wounded aswang, shrieked with laughter, a chilling, inhuman sound. Foolish mortal! You cannot fight us all. Your grandmother, your neighbors. All will feed us. Desperation fueled him. He sprinted towards his neighbor's fence, yelling warnings into the darkness, knowing they were futile. He saw the second flying aswang land on the neighbor's roof, its disgusting tongue already probing. He spun, bolo gripped tight. He had to draw them away, or at least thin their numbers. With a surge of adrenaline, he threw a handful of rock salt towards Maria, aiming for her pulsating guts. She recoiled with a hiss, the salt burning her supernatural flesh, giving him a precious few seconds. He didn't think, he just acted. He knew their weakness. He had to find their lower halves. He raced back towards his house, knowing the others would follow. As he neared the spot where he destroyed Maria's lower half, he heard a new, terrifying sound, a frantic, desperate digging. He froze. A shocking wave of realization hit him so hard it almost buckled his knees. There, in the dim light filtering from a distant, unaffected building, was Maria's human lower torso, covered in fresh dirt. And beside it, another lower torso, slightly smaller, equally pale. And another. They hadn't just left their parts nearby. They were gathering them, perhaps even preparing to reattach. But then he saw it, the first aswang he'd fought, Maria, had dragged her own lower half, the one he had butchered and burned, back to the spot. It was charred and mangled, but still distinct. And she was attempting to fuse with it, desperately trying to reconnect. The other aswang hovered above, shrieking encouragement, their own lower halves surprisingly absent. Elias's mind reeled. They didn't just leave their lower halves. They hid them, and then perhaps even moved them. The very aswang he had thought defeated, was trying to regenerate from the remnants he'd left behind. The idea of a creature trying to reanimate its own burned, severed body was a new, horrifying layer of depravity. The first fight hadn't been a victory, it had been a mere setback. Maria let out a guttural roar, her crimson eyes blazing with pure hatred as she ripped at the earth, a desperate attempt to rejoin with the charred remains. Elias's medical background, his understanding of anatomy, warred with the grotesque reality before him. He saw faint, tendril-like energies attempting to bridge the gap between Maria's upper torso and the burned lower half. This was not just a physical connection, it was something profoundly spiritual and demonic. Elias, fueled by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage and terror, lunged, bolo flashing. He brought the blade down, not on her, but on the connection she was desperately trying to forge, severing the ethereal strands that pulsed between her upper and lower body. The blade met resistance, like cutting through thick, gristle-laden rope, but it sliced through. A deafening, unearthly shriek tore through the night as Maria's upper torso recoiled violently, convulsing in the air. The charred remnants of her lower half, finally severed from any connection, disintegrated into a foul-smelling ash, truly gone this time. The other two aswang overhead let out wails of fury and despair, a primal lament for their fallen comrade. Their crimson eyes, now burning with pure, murderous intent, focused solely on Elias. They descended, their long tongues whipping like scourges, their spectral forms seeming to shimmer in the darkness. Elias, exhausted but fueled by a desperate hope, ducked and weaved, a terrifying dance of death in the urban darkness. He had destroyed one. He could destroy others. He had found their weakness, and now, he knew they could be beaten. He just needed to find their lower halves, hidden somewhere in the blacked-out city, before dawn claimed them all. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Elias felt a cold, determined resolve replace his terror. He was no longer just a doctor, he was a warrior in the shadows of Manila. The origins of the aswang are steeped in a rich, often terrifying tapestry of Filipino folklore, a blend of indigenous beliefs and later colonial influences. Unlike many Western monsters with singular origin stories, the aswang is an umbrella term encompassing a variety of evil, shape-shifting entities, each with its own variations and regional nuances. They are not born, but rather, made. The term aswang itself is an umbrella, a chilling category that describes various malevolent supernatural beings in Filipino folklore. They are primarily human-like by day, often blending seamlessly into communities, but transform into monstrous forms at night to hunt. Their defining characteristic is their insatiable hunger for human flesh, particularly internal organs, especially hearts and livers, and the unborn. They are not mindless beasts, they are cunning, intelligent, and deeply malicious. They are shape-shifting masters, perhaps their most iconic trait. While the narrative focuses on the variant that severs its upper torso, others include the Teak Belong, a humanoid creature with the head and feet of a horse, known for leading travelers astray in dense forests or isolated roads, sometimes even in suburban outskirts near neglected parks or fields. The Chanak, a demonic infant that mimics a crying baby to lure unsuspecting victims, only to reveal its true, fanged form and attack. They are particularly feared in urban alleys and forgotten construction sites. The Wakwakwarikek, bird-like aswang, often with razor-sharp claws and beaks, that swoop down from the sky to snatch victims or prey on the vulnerable. Their names come from the sound they make while flying. Some aswang can even transform into were animals like dogs, oso, or pigs, baboy, often larger and more aggressive versions, to stalk their prey unnoticed in the urban landscape. All of these are essentially viscera-eaters, driven by a hunger not for the flesh, but the internal organs, especially those of the weak, the sick, and pregnant women. They are said to use long, thin proboscises or elongated tongues to reach their victims from a distance, often through ceilings or floors. Aswang are nocturnal predators. They are weakest during the day, often appearing as ordinary, unassuming people, but gain their strength and ability to transform under the cover of darkness. The full moon often amplifies their powers. Despite their formidable powers, aswang are bound by certain folkloric weaknesses. Salt and garlic are potent deterrents, causing them pain or preventing their approach. The whip-like tail of a stingray, buntot pagi, particularly when dried, is considered a powerful weapon against them, capable of inflicting severe damage. Religious symbols and blessings can sometimes repel them. For the variant that severs its upper torso, its severed lower half is the ultimate weakness. If the upper torso cannot rejoin its lower half before sunrise, it perishes. Aswang are cunning and intelligent. They are not mindless beasts. They are deceptive, capable of blending into society, mimicking human behavior, and luring victims with cunning tricks. They can be vengeful, territorial, and will often seek retribution against those who harm them or their kin. The origin of an aswang is terrifyingly insidious. They are not born monsters but become so through heredity, contamination, dark magic, or as a curse. This ambiguity makes them all the more terrifying, as anyone could potentially harbor the curse. The aswang represents deeply ingrained fears in Filipino culture, the fear of the unknown, the betrayal of trust, the vulnerability of the human body, and the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people. For Elias, this was no longer a collection of terrifying stories. It was a brutal reality, an enemy that defied science and demanded a fight he was now determined to wage.